don't know how you feel about the Christmas season, and I realize that it's a mixed bag. I talk to some people, and they're like thrilled. You know, you finished work on Friday, or you finished school on Friday, and you're totally free. But then I talk to other people, and this is one of the hardest seasons of the year. I kind of feel like this season is a mingling of sorts. It's got beauty, but it also has ashes. It has ease on one hand, but it has discomfort on the other. There's happiness for some, but there's disappointment for others. A season of joy for all we have, but a season of sadness for all we've lost. Because sometimes I even think about Christmas dinner. Have you thought about what you're going to have for Christmas dinner? We've been planning the food at our house, planning Christmas dinner. And for some, it's like, it's such rejoicing. It's so much fun. It's wonderful to gather the family around the table. But I'd say for others, they're noticing the seats that are empty and the heartache that comes with loss. For some, there's joy to have the whole family together, but for others, there's just tension. For some, it's a season of giving and gifting, but for others, it's just greed and consumption. For some, Christmas is like a breath of fresh air, a time to relax. But for others, this very same season is just filled with clutter and chaos. Shopping, sending, coming, going, paying, stressing, wrapping, writing. I was in Smith's yesterday. Call me a last-minute shopper. Go ahead. Lukus, you're a last-minute shopper. I keep thinking I'm going to reform my ways, and I never do. I'm always left the week before Christmas. I'm trying to shop, and there's nothing left. You know how it is? Some of you know how it is because you're there with me. It's like the vultures have scavenged everything in the stores, and there's like a size extra, extra, extra small, or a size like 4 extra large, and it's like, what am I supposed to do here in between? Or you're looking in these shelves, and there's like this color, but you're missing all of these colors. You just don't know what to do. And that's where I was in Smith's. I was trying to find something. I couldn't help but overhear this woman. She was talking very loudly, and she was very frustrated. The kids were nagging, and she was trying to shoo them away. She's looking through this rack, and it doesn't have the size she wants, and she's frustrated. And the whole time she's on the phone with someone talking very loud. And this person, whoever it was on the phone, wanted money. And she's like, I don't have any money left. I'm trying to use all of our extra money for Christmas. And she's just stressed out. And I just stood there for a second, and I just thought, how many people are stressed out during the holidays? We want it to be joyful, and we want it to be a time of rest. But instead, it's just like filled with chaos. And our hearts are filled with anxiety. And what people desperately need is some peace. Isn't that what you need? I loved how Will opened our time together this morning. Just think about the things that are robbing you of peace and give them to God, because that's what we need, don't we? We need a little bit of peace this season. And I would suggest that we're not the only ones in history. We're not the only generation who has faced a season where we just need some peace. You know, if you look at this text, you'll find Israel and Judah in a season of life where what they desperately needed was some peace. Things were not well in Israel and Judah. There were no calm nights and bright skies. There's no heavenly peace coming down on them. At least that's how they felt. We're going to be in Isaiah 9 this morning, but I want you to back up and look at Isaiah 8 for a minute. Take a look at Isaiah chapter 8, verse number 12. First of all, you're going to get a kick out of this verse because it's almost speaking to us today. Isaiah 8:12, do not call conspiracy all that this people calls conspiracy. I read that this week. I'm thinking, wow, you must have had Facebook back then. Do not fear what they fear or be in dread, from verse number 8, you hear there are rumors of conspiracy. There are people who are in dread. By the time you get down to verse number 20 and 21, the end of verse 20, they have no dawn. Look at the end of chapter 8, verse 21. They will pass through the land greatly distressed and hungry. You can write above it the translation of the Hebrew, hangry. Greatly distressed plus hungry, hangry. You will see they will pass through the land greatly distressed and hungry. And when they're hungry, they will be enraged. And they will speak contemptuously against their king and their God. They'll turn their faces upward and they will look to the earth. But behold, distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into thick darkness. You know, for the people of Isaiah's day, melodies of mystic peace did not resonate from their voices. Peace candles were not lit. Everything was gloom and darkness and despair. That's where these people were. And what they needed most was some peace, but it fell out of reach. It fell out of grasp. It fell out of their control. And I think even Isaiah may have felt that way until he got this vision in chapter 9. In chapter 9, a vision of peace calms Isaiah's heart. And that's what I'd like to share with you this morning in the midst of chaos or whatever is robbing you of peace this season. Whatever's stressing you out or giving you anxiety, whatever that is. I was just praying, like at the beginning of the service, just praying, oh, Air Command and Staff College assignment that I've got to write and turn in by tonight at 11:59. Okay, Lord, just take that. If for some way you could make a miracle and write that, that would be nice. Whatever your stress is, whatever your anxiety is, this text whispers calmly. It says this: be at peace. Take a deep breath. Be at peace. Now, some of you are like, that would be a Christmas miracle. Be at peace. How in the world is that possible? That's what he talks about in this text. Let me show it to you. The first thing Isaiah says is, be at peace because a great reversal lies ahead. A great reversal lies ahead. Be at peace. And you see that in chapter 9, verse 1. I want you to see if you can see the great reversal in this text. Isaiah 9:1. There will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. Just pause for a second. Do you remember the end of chapter 8? The end of chapter 8 says they're going to be in distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish. They'll be thrust into thick darkness. Well, notice the reversal, chapter 9, verse 1. There will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he has made glorious the way of the sea and the land beyond Jordan, Galilee of the nations. In the former time, it was darkness and gloom. But in the latter time, it will be glorious and bright. There's going to be a great reversal. When you know that bad things are going to be reversed and made good, then you can be at rest, can't you? You can be at peace. I don't know if you're this way around holidays. We're in a season of life now where I'm trying to introduce my kids to some of the classic movies of my teenage years, like 80s and 90s movies. There was one. How many of you have ever watched a Rocky movie? Okay, good. Some of you know, like, Rocky? What's that? Rocky Balboa, remember? Sylvester Stallone plays this boxer from Philadelphia. 1985, Rocky 4. It just keeps going. Rocky 4 was released. And this is where Philadelphia takes on Russia. Do you remember that? The Russian. And Rocky's got these like stars and stripes shorts on, and he's facing Russia. And I can remember watching this with someone who had already watched it. The last fight scene is 10 minutes long. It's a boxing match, 10 minutes long. The first 2 minutes are terrible. At least for a person who's never watched it before, you're like, oh no, America's going to lose to Russia. And there's some Russians in the room. This isn't about you. America's going to lose to Russia. And you just see the first 2 minutes. I mean, Rocky's just getting beat up all over the mat. And it was funny because the person sitting next to me who had already watched it is very calm. I'm like, get up. You know, I'm stressed. 1985, teenager, I want him to win. America. You know, you want him to win. Very stressed. Why is this person so calm sitting next to me? Do you want to know why? Because they know how the next 8 minutes play out. They know the end of the story. They realize there's going to be a great reversal, and Rocky will win. That's what's going to happen. Oh, spoiler alert, sorry. He's going to win. When there's a great reversal that's going to happen, then don't you see, you can just sit at peace. You can be at rest. That's what he's saying about your life. You're all stressed out, and you're all anxious, and you're deeply worried, and you're harassed by life, and he wants you to be at peace. How can I be at peace when everything's crazy? Because there's going to be a great reversal. That's how powerful God is. In this text, he talks about the great reversal a few different ways. The first way is in verse number 2. He says, the great reversal is going to be like taking darkness and turning it to light. Look at verse 2. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shone. Here the people of Israel and Judah are described as people who are in darkness. Now, darkness doesn't mean like the lights are turned out or the sun didn't rise. He's not talking about that, like physical light or physical darkness. He's talking about spiritual light and spiritual darkness. The people of Israel and Judah were in spiritual darkness. They were in sin. They were living lives of transgression. They were disobeying the Lord. Now, when we think of darkness, of sin, we think of people who are openly or blatantly rebellious. But I want to suggest to you that the darkness here was not just those who were rebellious. It was those who were religious too. See, in Israel and Judah, they were very religious people, but they were just as blind as the next person. You know, by the time Jesus comes on the scene, he talks to religious leaders and he calls them blind, or literally people who are groping around in darkness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, you blind guides. You clean the outside of the cup and plate, but inside you're full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisees. What is Jesus saying? He's saying empty religion is just as dark as blatant rebellion. You can be blind in both situations. So it's not just people who are out there, who've never stepped inside of a church before, who are just living rebellious lives. Those people out there are in darkness. I think what he's indicating is there could be people in here who are in darkness. People who look very religious, but are still very lost. And what he says is, you can only be at peace when light breaks in. I love this text because the light that comes isn't something they whip up themselves. It's not like you whip up a little bit of light. There's like commercials going around like, the spark inside you is the goodness you need to share with everyone. No. You don't have spark inside you. You have dark inside you. And someone needs to come down and break into the darkness. And that's what the light of the world has done. He's the one that can turn darkness into light because he breaks in. We don't produce it. We're not responsible for it. All we are is groping around in darkness and sitting in death's shadow. When suddenly God breaks into our lives and we're blinking and squinting spiritually because of such a brilliant light. Remember how John describes the Lord? He says this, God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. Or the psalmist puts it this way, the Lord wraps himself in light as with a garment. Well, what happens in our text here is there's a great reversal. Darkness is turned to light. The sun punches through the smog of sin and religiosity, and he turns darkness to light. Not only that, the reversal is described this way in verse 3. Verse 3, not only darkness turned to light, but gloom is turned to rejoicing. When you think about this reversal, think about gloom and despair being turned to joy and rejoicing. Verse 3, look at the text. You've multiplied the nation. You've increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest. They are glad when they divide the spoil. Do you see this over and over again? They rejoice, they have joy, they're glad. The gloom of chapter 8, verse 22. Remember the gloom of anguish? The gloom has been turned to joy. Do you realize God can do that? Whatever the deepest crevice of your despair is, whatever the darkest part of your depression is, do you believe that God can reach down that far? Do you believe that he can give joy to those who are in gloom? That's what he's saying the great reversal is. The great reversal is that God can reach all the way down to those spots. Makes the nation swell and grow, gives them a harvest of abundance. They're going to be like people dividing the spoils of victory in verse 3. The moping and depressed, the downcast and the sullen, the discouraged and the defeated, they're going to be changed. And they're going to have joy. That's what he says here. I think it is. I think like a 3 and a 4-year-old on Christmas morning, the spoils of Christmas, all these gifts under the tree. When my kids were young, I loved early Christmas. I loved giving them gifts. First, they're super excited about the box. It has nothing to do with the gift. It's just like the box, And then they grow and they like what's inside the box. And then they grow, and the smaller the box and more expensive it is, the better off it is, right? They're not looking for the big gifts. They're looking for the very expensive small gifts. But you think of a child who's just filled with joy at the spoils of a victorious Christmas. And he's saying, what I'm going to do in your hearts is I'm going to conquer. I'm going to defeat despair and gloom. And in its place, I'm going to give you the spoils of joy. That's what he's promising here. That's this great reversal, a bountiful harvest, spoils of victory, joy, and rejoicing. He can change you. He can transform you. I want you to pause for a second. Here's what Isaiah is saying. Be at peace. Why? Because a great reversal lies ahead. He can take darkness, whatever the darkness is in your life, and he can break in with light. He can take gloom, despair, and he can turn it into joy and rejoicing. There's one last description I want to show you. It's in verses 4 and 5. He can take oppression and turn it to freedom. This is this great reversal you see here. Notice verse 4. For the yoke of his burden, the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken, as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the trampling warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. What is Isaiah telling these people? He's saying, do you realize that God can reverse the oppression you felt? He can take the yoke of burden and remove it. He can take the instruments of force and he can break them. He can take all that oppressed you and burn it like a pile of spoils after a war. He makes an allusion. Did you catch this? He says, like as the day of Midian. When you hear Midian, do you remember a story in the book of Judges? How many of you remember a story about Midian in the book of Judges? A few of you. The way you remember Midian is connected with, there's a guy whose name rhymes with it, Gideon. Gideon. So Gideon had 300 men, only 300, against the entire Midianite army. And this is a story in the book of Judges where, Gideon has this large army and God keeps whittling it down and says, no, it's too big. And it just whittles it down all the way to 300. And Gideon's like, 300 against the entire Midianite army? Are you kidding me? And God wanted to show his might. God wanted to show his power about how he was going to be the one that's going to be glorified by releasing Israel from the oppression of the Midianites. So he does it with 300 men. They have these lanterns and these clay jars, and they break the jars, and they yell at night and charge the Midianite army, and there's confusion and chaos, and they end up slaughtering each other, and there's a great victory. You can read about it in the book of Judges. But that whole reference there is about how God could take the oppression of the Midianites, and he could break it. He did it with just 300 men with little lights, lanterns, and yelling. He can do that. He can take whatever it is in your life that's oppressing you, that's holding you in bondage, these chains that bind you, and he can bring freedom. See, like that's why I think there's such peace. When you trust him, I mean, think about it this way. When you trust him, you can be at peace because he can take whatever chains bind you and he can break them. He can take whatever oppression is crushing you and he can remove it. He brings that sort of freedom. That's what he's promising here. That's why he's saying you can be at peace, because there's such a great reversal. You're no longer going to have to be a slave of fear. You can have the freedom of what it means to be a child of God. The gloom of force, the gray of burdensome oppression, all of that is lifted in this great reversal. So a great reversal, that's why you can be at peace. A reversal that turns darkness to light, gloom to rejoicing, oppression to freedom, a great reversal. Now, some of you are like, this is wonderful. I would really appreciate a great reversal this season. Some of you, even as you think about what robs you of peace, like earlier in the service, you've thought about the fact that that has robbed you of peace for a very long time, right? I mean, some of these things in our life that steal our peace have been stealing our peace for a long time. And then you hear about, oh, a great reversal, another Christmas story, great reversal. How in the world is that possible? I mean, how does darkness get turned to light and, gloom to joy and oppression to freedom? I'd love all those things. But how is that even going to be possible? How can I really be at peace? I want to tell you something. In this text, Isaiah is going to identify that this is possible. This great reversal is going to be possible through a great rescuer. Like the only way it's possible is not because you're going to be able to reform yourself, not because you're going to turn over a New Year's resolution that's going to transform your life somehow. It's not. You're going to quit going to the gym after January. It's not going to change your life. The great reversal that you're hoping for is only going to come through a great rescuer. That's what you need. You need a great rescuer. And so here in our text, that's what unfolds in this story. That's how things are going to be reversed, because there's a great rescuer. And so I just want to be super clear, because I've been a little frustrated this week. I want to be super clear. Here at this church, you're going to hear who the great rescuer is. The great rescuer is not Santa or an elf that sings loud for all to hear. It's not a sleigh. It's none of those things. The great rescuer is Jesus. You don't need Santa and his elves. You desperately need Jesus. He's the rescuer you deeply need. I'm just going to tell you, I'm grieved because even in this valley, there are places that call themselves churches that are pointing people to empty cisterns and muddy waters of Santa Claus and elves instead of the hope that lies in Jesus. And as a pastor, that just deeply grieves me. It grieves me to see church Facebook advertisements that don't have Jesus in them. Jesus is the rescuer that can do what you need. There is no other name under heaven given among men whereby you can be saved. It is only Jesus. He is the only way. He is the only one. He's the one you desperately need because he alone can rescue you. Real peace comes from a real rescuer. Some of the reasons some of these people that fill churches don't have real peace is because they're not looking to a real rescuer. Look to the real rescuer. I'm not the real rescuer. Jesus is the real rescuer. Look to him. That's what he unfolds here in Isaiah 9. I mean, the beauty of this is that Isaiah is going to point these people to a rescuer that he's already prophesied of. You see, 2 chapters earlier, Isaiah had prophesied. He had done it to King Ahaz, who was a disbelieving king. Ahaz was fearful. He had lacking faith. And Isaiah the prophet comes to Ahaz in Isaiah chapter 7, and he looks at him and says, just ask a sign. Ask for a sign so that God can confirm in your own heart that he's in control, that he can rescue you from Assyria. And Ahaz won't do it. He's a disbelieving king. He won't ask for a sign. So Isaiah looks at Ahaz, and he's almost like, this is what I picture. I don't know. He may not have done this with it, but that's what I picture. I picture an old prophet just pointing his finger at King Ahaz and says, you won't ask for a sign? You won't ask for a sign? I'm going to give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you will call his name Emmanuel. That's in Isaiah 7:14. What was Isaiah doing in that passage? He's prophesying of a rescuer who would come. He'd be born of a virgin. He would bring salvation. He would be Emmanuel, or God with us. So who is this child that's going to be born of a virgin that will save people and change the earth and rescue people like us? Who is this child? Well, notice in our text, Isaiah 9, verse 6. In Isaiah 9:6, you see who this child is, who this rescuer is. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. What is Isaiah doing in this section? He's showing us that peace is possible. This great reversal is going to take place, and it's going to happen through this rescuer. And that's why you can be at peace. Like, if you know that someone's coming who can fix it, then you can rest in your soul. When I was in high school, I did a few different sports. I was on the golf team, not because I was good at golf. I was terrible at golf, but because I got to golf for free at the country club every week by being on the golf team. I put more divots in that country club fairway than anybody else. I was on the golf team in high school. I also was on the wrestling team. I wrestled. My dad was a wrestler, and so he wanted us to wrestle, so I was on the wrestling team. In high school, my 9th grade year, I was just thinking about this. I wrestled 112 pounds. You're looking at me, Lukus, you've at least doubled your muscle mass. You're right. At least doubled my muscle mass since then. 112 pounds. I remember I'm a freshman. I'm on the wrestling team. Back then, they still did freshman hazing. Now, these days, you get put in jail for that. But at my high school, they were still doing freshman hazing. I still remember being on a wrestling team. Like, oh, no, I'm a freshman. What are they going to do to me? Because I watched them. I mean, they grabbed this one freshman. They took duct tape on this boy's legs and just, it was like Nair before that was a thing, or waxing or whatever. I don't know. They were just yanking duct tape off his legs. And I remember this other freshman, I came in one day. He was upside down in a trash can. They had like turned him upside down. His feet were like this. You know, he couldn't get out of the trash can. And I just thought, there's this one particular day, I thought, oh, my day's coming. And I was kind of scared about this. And this one particular day, here are these upperclassmen, and they had evil in their eyes. And I could see them, and I'm like, oh, no, this is going to be the day I'm going to get the hazing. Uh-oh. But then all of a sudden, I caught a glimpse behind them. You know who was behind them? My older brother, who was the captain of the wrestling team. Now, there may have been hazing going on for these other freshmen. I'm going to tell you what, he wasn't going to let any hazing be done to me. And I remember these guys, evil in their eyes, start walking towards me. But then my brother's back there. And he makes a little noise, and they turn around and see him. And all of a sudden, they change their path and go another way, right? Why? Well, because a rescuer's coming. A rescuer's coming. I can be at peace because a rescuer's coming. And you can be too. And who is this rescuer? Well, Isaiah says, listen, he's the wonderful counselor. He's wonderful. He gives wise advice. He's not limited and flawed like some of the counselors. He doesn't need a cabinet or a row of advisors. He's got all the wisdom you need. You know, some people, you're looking for a therapist, you're looking for a counselor, and I just want to tell you, he's the wonderful counselor. He understands you personally. He can diagnose you properly. He's the wonderful counselor. He can rescue you. Goes on and says he's the mighty God. It's just applying divine terminology to this Messiah who's coming. If there's any doubt whether Jesus was fully God, you need to read this text. The gospel writers make it clear. This text is talking about Jesus, and this text says he's the mighty God. every use of that Hebrew phrase for mighty God, every use of it speaks of full divinity. Every use. Go to Deuteronomy, go other places in Isaiah. Every place it's used. Jeremiah, full divinity. Full divinity resides in this Messiah. He's the wonderful counselor. He's fully God. Paul will later say it this way, in Christ, all the fullness of deity dwells. He's mighty and powerful. He's fully God. He can absorb all evil. He's mighty to save and he's mighty to help. When I think about mighty God, there's like joy that wells up in my heart, and here's why. Because he's mighty to save people who are in all kinds of sinful straits. In other words, you can't be here this morning or you can't be watching on the live stream and think to yourself, yeah, I know he can save other people, but he probably can't save me. I know he can forgive other people, but you don't know what I've done. No, he is the mighty God. He is mighty to save. He can save all of us. He's mighty to save, and he's mighty to help. I just think there's some people here who are probably hurting this season. You've been hurt by other people. You know, even gathering family together, sometimes gathering family together is very hard because you actually are with people who hurt you. And I just think, wow, he's mighty to help you. He's mighty to save, and he's mighty to help because he's a mighty God. Wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father. I think this one's an important one. It's not a confusion between the Son of God and God the Father. There's not a confusion here. It's saying that the Messiah has fatherly qualities. It's a qualitative description. The character of this rescuer is paternal in nature. Think about how a father has compassion on people. Well, the rescuer, the Messiah, has compassion on us. Think about how a father delivers those in need. The rescuer is coming to our aid. He has fatherly care, and he wants to rescue. Wonderful counselor, mighty God, eternal Father. The last one, Prince of Peace. Who's this rescuer? He's the Prince of Peace. You hear the word prince, and you think of a kingdom, right? But the greatness of his kingdom is not war. The greatness of his kingdom is peace. He's the Prince of Peace. He's the one that can take all the broken relationships that we've made. Think about how your sin has broken relationships. Think about how other people's sin has broken relationships. The Prince of Peace is the divine peacemaker. He brings reconciliation to all kinds of brokenness. He's the one that sets things right. I love how Isaiah will talk about this Prince of Peace. In the book of Isaiah, he'll say he'll work such restoration, Isaiah 55:12. He'll work such restoration, he'll bring such peace that the mountains and hills will burst into song. Isaiah will go on, he'll say, peace is going to flow like a river from this one. I mean, you're not going to just get a drop of peace. There's a dropper, and he gives you one little drop of peace. Now use it wisely. Here's a drop. No, it's going to flow like a river. Peace comes from him. He's the wellspring of peace. He's the divine peacemaker. And I love when Jesus comes on the scene, when the Word takes on flesh and dwells among us. Do you know the first words of the resurrected Jesus? First words of the resurrected Jesus recorded in John 20, verse 19. Peace be with you. Peace be with you. He brings peace. Or you think about the gospel message that he proclaimed. It's called the good news of peace in Acts 10:36. In our book of Isaiah, Isaiah 53, he's going to say this: the punishment that brought us peace was put on him. He's the Prince of Peace. So, what does Isaiah say in the text? Here's what he's saying. Be at peace. Why? Because a great reversal lies ahead. Be at peace because a great rescuer is on his way. And as we close this morning, there's one more thing. He says, be at peace because a great Redeemer has offered himself. Think about it. You can be at peace because the great Redeemer has offered himself. And I think this is important because these truths can't be distant to you. They can't be abstract. Like you leave here thinking about, okay, I need to look ahead to an impending reversal and I need to anticipate a coming rescuer. Yeah, great. But who is that one? You need to leave here with a personal discovery that the Redeemer who brings you peace is none other than Jesus himself. The New Testament unfolds this passage with crystal clarity. Like some people read Isaiah and they're like, I wonder who this is talking about. Like, Lukus, are you making all of this up? Are you reading Isaiah during the week and you're thinking, I wonder who the Prince of Peace is? Well, let's just call him Jesus. Are you wondering if I'm making it up? No, the apostles told us. The apostles made it clear that this text is talking about a Redeemer who offered himself, named Jesus. Where's that at? You can write in the margin of Isaiah chapter 9. Write this reference in the margin. Matthew 4, verses 12 through 17. In Matthew 4, the apostle Matthew writes this in his gospel account. Now, when he heard that John had been arrested, Jesus withdrew into Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali. Wait a second, you're like, I've heard Zebulun and Naphtali. Where did I hear about them? In Isaiah 9:1. So Jesus goes to the area of Capernaum, Matthew makes it clear, the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali. And then he goes on, he says, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. For those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them light has dawned. From that time, Jesus began to preach, saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. What is Matthew doing? He's saying, do you remember Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 and 2? That was fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus' first ministry, the place where light broke into darkness. Where did it happen first? Isaiah 9:1, in Galilee. That's where it happened first, so that it might be fulfilled what was spoken of by the prophet. He was going to bring about this great reversal. He was going to come as the great rescuer. It was Jesus, and he was going to redeem people from their sin. He was going to pull people out of darkness into light, out of gloom into joy, out of bondage into freedom. Jesus was going to forgive, and he was going to heal, and he was going to cast out demons, and he was going to proclaim the message of the kingdom. This great Redeemer was changing lives back then. And I want to suggest to you that this Christmas, he's changing lives as well. So maybe you're here and you need some peace. Maybe you need the peace of forgiveness. Do you know that that's offered in Jesus? Maybe you need peace for your soul. Then listen to Jesus. He says, come to me, all that are weary and heavily burdened, and I'll give you rest. I'll give you peace. Maybe you need peace in the midst of a trial. My friend, the Lord blesses his people with peace. So will you run to your Redeemer? Will you run to this Prince of Peace and receive what he offers this Christmas? Let's pray together. Lord, as we quiet our hearts and seek to reflect on the word and respond to it, I just pray that you would pour out your peace. I feel like we're like sheep, like the ones mentioned in Matthew chapter 9, when Jesus looks out on the crowd and he says they're like sheep harassed by life. We're like that. We're stressed and we're having trouble taking a deep breath. We're having trouble coming to rest. We're having trouble with peace. But you look at us and you have compassion on us, and you're willing to minister peace to our souls. So help us, even in the quietness of this moment, to come to you. If our life is troubled, if our heart is restless, help us to come to you and find peace. If we're tired of the peace the world offers, these cheap substitutes that don't last and never fix things, if we're tired of those things, help us come to you and find true and lasting peace. If we've never received the gift of peace that reaches all the way down to our souls, help us to turn from our sin and trust in Jesus alone for salvation and receive a peace that passes understanding. Lord, we ask that you would pour out your peace. In Jesus' name, amen. I wonder if you just take these next few moments in the quietness at your seat, just reflect on the word of the Lord and respond to him. Maybe thank him for the peace that he offers, or maybe ask him for the peace that he offers. This is a season of peace for those who will believe in Jesus and receive his gift.